What's the worst book you've ever read? Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Maybe a good play, haven't seen it, but the book is lazy, boring and poorly written. Also the whole Volder's daughter is stupid. The 100 Lies of Lizzie Lovett. Basically, this teenage girl who we are supposed to think is likably quirky, but is actually a huge bitch, thinks that a girl she didn't even like turned into a werewolf when she disappeared. This is not played for laughs, and this is not a world in which werewolves or fantasy crap exists. She becomes obsessed with the missing girl and falls in love with the girl's 30-year-old boyfriend when she's 16, though acts much younger. This isn't a book about a descent into madness either. This is supposed to be seen as normal. Hated it, and I'll bash it every chance I get. The Compound is an edgy teen post-apocalyptic shelter book in which every character undergoes immediate overhauls of their entire personality whenever convenient. 50 Shades of Grey. To Kill a Mockingbird. It offered zero instructions on how to kill a mockingbird. It did teach me not to judge a man based on the color of his skin. But what good does that do me? Advanced Engineering Mathematics. The Secret. It was big for a while, and Oprah was into it. Basically says if your life sucks you aren't envisioning hard enough. Frick that. Mockingjay. The first 2 Hunger Games were at least readable, but the third was just Katniss complaining about a lot in life, and generally being an annoying, edgy teenager. The Zoo. It was a spur-of-the-moment Costco purchase. It's about animals taking over the world basically. I live texted a friend as I read it. It had every trope you could imagine in it. Story felt like it was written as part of someone's grade school project. There is now a TV show with several seasons. Go figure. Ready Player One. Never should have been a book, just a movie. It was literally a shallow story that got a huge following because every page has 35 70s 90s gaming references. It's the book equivalent of Robot Chicken. I tried to read the first chapter of The Lie, Evolution by Ken Ham. The first chapter's argument was circular, contrived, easily disproven, and relied purely upon the argument because the Bible said so, and also tried to paint an idyllic picture of how Christianity used to be 60 years ago. You mean the days of World War II, when we were firebombing each other and sticking people in camps? Sign me up. /s. I'm a Christian myself, but believing in evolution does not mean that you reject Christian faith. Not the worst, but there was actually a Brent Weeks book I threw in frustration because of the line "it was so beautiful you'd crap yourself." It was such a dumb freaking line and I could not read beyond that. It sucks personally because I have a fondness for Brent Weeks. He's the writer that got me into fantasy. It was written for me and my kind, video gamers who grew up in the 80s, but Ready Player One was pretty awful. Hey, is that cultural reference 1? Yep, rat. The Da Vinci Code. Cookie cutter hero character faced with incredibly contrived puzzles to solve to SAAAVE the Woo world. Spoiler warning. I was also particularly annoyed that the super secret ending was based on a classics major's version of a pun. That's Greek Latin for Holy Grail. Sounds kind of like the Latinate word sangre, which means blood. It's like the discovery that the US Constitution was really meant to describe being constipated. Left Behind. I wanted to enjoy it as a post-apocalyptic thriller, and I don't mind religious element, but it was just plain stupid. Twilight. We had to read it in high school. I wrote a book as a 9-year-old called Magic Final. It was over 100 pages long. Found it not too long ago while going through old items, and it was without a doubt the worst book I've ever read. Zoo by James Patterson. Infuriatingly terrible. Not just a single book, but a series. Good kind sort of truth series. The first 3 are pretty good, but then it turns into the author's political ranting in a fantasy setting. When one of the villains is a village of evil pacifists, you know it's gone bonkers. Dianetics. Someone bet me I wouldn't read it. The final straw was the part where people's weight disorders stem from you being in the womb and your pregnant mom says how she hates being overweight. Yes, because a baby in the womb understands language and the concept of being fat. I literally threw the book across the room. I did collect on the bet though, because my friend was shocked I made it as far as I did. Very possibly Armada by Ernie Klein. It's a shame, because I unabashedly love the cheesy retro nostalgia bomb that was Ready Player One. I was really hoping he'd knock it out of the park with a follow-up. Nope. This book is freaking awful. It's not a sequel. Doesn't tie in at all. It's just trying to do the exact same thing all over again by stealing plots from The Last Starfighter and Ender's Game and cramming in as many 70s and 80s references he possibly can. The main love interest, Alexis Lex Larkin, is the most obnoxiously typical manic pixie geek fantasy one could imagine. She was just off to my right, sitting all alone in a deserted row near the back, taking brazen pulls from a chrome hip flask painted to look like R2-D2. Her pale, alabaster skin contrasted sharply with her dark clothing, black combat boots, black jeans, and a black tank top, which didn't fully conceal the black bra she was wearing underneath. She had a spiky wave of black hair that was buzzed down one side and chin length on the other, but the real kicker was her tattoos. On each arm, on the left was a beautiful semi-nude rendering of the comic book heroine Tank Girl, adorned in post-apocalyptic rock lingerie and smooching an M16. On her right bicep, in stylized capital letters, were the words El Risco Siempre Vive. He then charms her by proving how nerdy he is, recognizing that her tattoo is from the movie Aliens, and making bumbling nerdy pickup lines. This book is so freaking terrible. The only joy I got out of it was reading various passages aloud to friends who laughed their asses off at how atrociously written it is. The Bible. I don't mean to be rude with this answer. I just found it to be a terrible read personally. Mobby Peen. I wanted to like the book, but all those pages going on and on about whale blubber turned me off. Anything published by Pearson. Divergent and Maze Runner series. The first of each were okay. Anyone ever heard of Wreathy by Storm Constantine? Yeah, when I was a teenager I saw it at my local library and thought, oh neat, sci-fi/fantasy stuff I haven't heard about. Within a couple hours I knew I'd made a very big mistake. I'm probably wrong, but House Rules by Jodi Picoult. I have Asperger's syndrome. The tier of functional she portrays the main character's son as is incredibly low. Yet, throughout the entire book, as far as I could make myself read, she insensitively portrays him as just your regular, run-of-the-mill Aspie. I hate it. A lot of people I'm semi-acquaintances with have read that book, and I'm horrified that they understand me, or others, as an incredible burden and struggle for my family. I'm not saying that people diagnosed with low-functioning Asperger's don't deserve to see the light. Just give people some freaking context. Again, I could be completely off base with this. Feel free to correct me. Edit. Guess I'm not wrong. McKee by Chelsea Martin. I picked it up randomly at a local bookstore because what little I read seemed promising. I took a creative writing class in college, and one thing my professor said that stuck with me is to read the kinds of books that I'd be interested in writing. So anything written in vignettes, my preferred style at the time, was what I'd usually end up buying/renting, because I rarely stumbled upon them. I've never wanted to trash a book so fast in my life. The writing was actually okay, but the narrator was incredibly narcissistic and unpalatable. The book itself could have been easily finished within an hour, but I couldn't even be bothered to waste time slogging through it. My options were to throw it away or have it recycled, but instead I drove the 45 minutes back to the bookstore to get my money back. The Scarlet Letter has to be up there for me. I suppose there are some interesting concepts that are explored, but the writing style is so devoid of anything entertaining. It's been a few years since I've read the book, but I recall there being several pages dedicated to just describing a character walking down a hallway. It was such a slog to get through. Any John Green book, they all start with the main character, Boy 1, lonely, quirky, and oh man, how doesn't he already have a girlfriend? And he meets girl, but oh no, she already has a boyfriend and he just waits for her to be single, and then girl admits, yeah, I really like you. It's because I can't make up my mind. OMG, right. Looking for Alaska. Abundance of Catherines. Paper towns. Used to love them when I was a teen and a hopeless romantic. Now they're edgy and cringy. Fault in Our Stars is Meg Good but meh. Hasn't read Turtles all the way down. And I don't plan to. The Little Prince and Don Quixote. I originally liked Don Quixote, but the Spanish school system makes you read it twice a year for something like 8 years of schooling. I now break out in a rash when I see a copy. My girlfriend had an Encolta book. She bought it on a recommendation from a friend. I was on the crapter, appropriate for the subject matter, and thought, what the hell? Let's see what's up. Oh my goodness. That book was a particular brand of awful, stream of consciousness nonsense structure paired with hateful political nonsense. A powerful pairing. I could never finish Wuthering Heights. Divergent. Without a doubt it has to be Atlas Shrugged. Good god, that was torture. Turner Diaries. Out of morbid curiosity. It's a poorly written racist, anti-Semitic, conspiracy theory novel. How to Goodbye Depression. If you constrict anus 100 times every day. Malarkey, or effective way. Hiroyuki Nishigaki. The entire book is full of poorly translated emails into English and sent to various people, and documents the conversation threads. It's one of the best joke Christmas presents I know about. I hope the man makes a sequel. Go Ask Alice. I know it said it was taken from the real diary of an actual teenager, but it was so obviously faked that I rolled my eyes hard enough that I'm surprised they didn't stick in the back of my head that way. Other than all the required reading crap from high school, like Lord of the Flies, I'm going to go with If I Stay by Gail Forman for the sole reason that it contained a scene where the main character and her boyfriend had sex and he played her like a cello. Like he took the bow and just rubbed it on her while they fricked. And that's all I remember of the book. I usually hate piano bells, but I was getting on a plane and needed a read, so I bought The Warrior Rare at the airport bookstore. I actually enjoyed it. I got into the series and read until I got to The Sorcerer Rare, which I think is book 4. I don't know what happened, but I couldn't believe it was the same author. It read like cliche trash fanfiction of the main story. It checked every box of overly plain, but sought after female protagonist, a mopey and depressed, but somehow extremely attractive male lead. He, get this, falls in love with her, shocker, but can't act on it, because he kills everyone he touches instantly. Also he plays in an emo band. Good lord, it was trash. The Catcher in the Rye. Frick you Holden, the funny. Back when I worked at a Starbucks kiosk we had a regular we called Crazy Jody. She claimed to be psychic, could talk to and see ghosts, that she was the reincarnation of a colonial girl named Maribel, that she helped out the police with her psychic abilities. She also wrote book on an experience with some ghosts and she gave us a signed copy. I have it on my desk at my new job in case someone doesn't believe this woman exists. Diary of a Wimpy Vampire / Werewolf. Those books are just dumb. Marilyn Manson's autobiography. High school was a time folks actually think it may have killed off neurons. I read 50 Shades, Twilight, The Host, all the series that make you want to throat pluck the author. Nothing was as bad as that. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I'm sorry, I just thought it was preachy and didn't really have any sort of valid message. It was very gripping, though. I tried reading Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand when I started college in the late 80s. Some other students regaled the bloody thing as a religious experience. I would also equate it with a religious experience. As in I hated this book as much as I would hate being forced to go to church and listen to a sermon. I like a lot of penance, but I hated Great Expectations. It's the only book I can think of that I've read all the way through and can't find a single aspect that I appreciate. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So freaking lame. It was Jane Austen's exact same book, except the author randomly inserted zombie scenes throughout the book. Valis by Philip K. Bean. This isn't because the book is terrible per se. It's because I think the book is evidence that the man was very unwell, and I think that, in publishing it at all, his publishers and agent were milking a mentally ill man's ravings for cash. There was this book I read when I was about 12, and it was about people who have affairs that give people helpful abilities. So our protagonist, 12-year-old Charlie, has one that lets her get a parking space no matter what. Super useful, right? Well, everyone wants to sit in their cars, and one particular boy is a pushy meathead. As a result, she hates her fairy. It's messed up. The school she goes to is something out of her authoritarian's wet dream. Even the calories are regulated, and if they are out of place you get into serious trouble. And if she gets into trouble she has to do community service until late hours and be expected to finish this mind-breaking workload of homework, all at 12 years old. And this is not questioned at all. What kind of kid would want to go to a school like that? Isn't a fantasy novel supposed to have some pull into? Hey, I wanna live in that world. Oh, that's not the worst part. At one point the creepy boy basically kidnaps her so he can get a good parking space somewhere. And he goes to the same school, where they even regulate calories. And the school does nothing. Just a hand wave at the end, that he'll get a stern talking to. Charl is not exactly a bed of roses either. She whines and whines throughout the book. She hates a girl, because she has a weird name and is rich. Until it turns out, that the rich girl's mom can transfer fairies or something. Then Charlie loves this girl. So Charlie gets a new fairy. Except this one causes every boy to fall in love with her. Even the gay boys. Unfortunate implications ahoy, mateys. Charlie has to get rid of these fairies, so she goes on a death-defying ride down a toboggan. And then she loses both of her fairies. Instead of reflecting on how her stupid little stunt almost got her killed, she whines about not having any fairies. Except she does get a fairy. One that helps her with her favorite sport. Basketball. Remember kids, you can't achieve anything through your own sweat and skill. No. Just get a do sex match in a fairy that helps you cheat. Horrible. Oh, I almost forgot. This book had its own confusing, stupid slang, all in an index at the end. Wow. I love trying to getting immersed in a world and having to check what a made up word is supposed to mean, because you really needed that quirky angle. Atlas shrugged. It would be generous to describe the characters as cardboard cutouts. Let me sum up 1000 plus pages. Conservatism good. Liberalism bad. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Need I say more? Last Light by Terry Blackstock. Started out as an awesome apocalypse story with cool characters. Slowly turned into Christian propaganda. It was like reading gospel after a while. God was mentioned every other paragraph. I couldn't even finish the last few chapters. It also spent a weird amount of time talking about the evils of sexography. It was some series or book called Queen of Racket / Rakalian / whatever, I don't even care to remember the name. I hated it for one particular reason. I hated the main character. It was like some weird desert kingdom setting with scorpion gods. And all that was cool. But my god, the main girl was just so awful. She was a literal holier than thou, self-assured to the point of nausea person. And by the halfway point of the first book, I wanted her to fail. I was rooting for every character that stood in her way to prove her wrong. Easily the most hateable protagonist I'd ever seen. Factotum by Bukowski. It could have been a short story, or just a poem. Woke up with a bottle still in my hand. Who's this laying next to me? At work. Probably gonna get fired. Who cares? Yup, I got fired. Frick it. Let's drink. Woke up with a bottle still in my hand. That girl is back though. This carries on for 150 pages. The Phone Book. Huge cast of characters but crappy story. Prince of Thorns. The author is a legitimate rocket scientist. And let me tell you, he really should stick to that. The book was awful. Tale of Two Cities. 50 Shades of Grey is an offensively terrible book. I loved War and Peace, but couldn't force myself through Anna Karenina. Also, same thing with Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Anyone here read Anita Blake? It started out so good, a necromancy that raises the dead to solve crimes. It's used in trials and everything. There are vampires and werewolves, and Anita is sassy AF, and doesn't take crap from anyone. Evolves over the series into her taking peen from everyone. Literally, I had to stop reading, and I was incredibly disappointed. Heart of Darkness. It was boring as frick, while also being really messed up. I had to read it for school, and I got the flu while I was slogging through it. Q fever dreams of the severed heads and stuff. How a book where so many objectively interesting things happen can be so hard to get through, though, is beyond me. Eragon. I was a young obsessed with fantasy reader around the time it came out. so my librarian recommended it to me. I found it okay, but the whole time I was thinking I swear I've read this before. It's so familiar. When I brought it back the next week I told her I had already read it before, and she told me it was just released that month. Ready Player One. I find the concept of a virtual reality world and an Easter egg hunt interesting, and that's what drove me to read it in the first place. But the book devolves into listing stuff from the 80s over and over again, to the point I'm still not sure it was some elaborated joke from the author to see if it could get a book published like that, or he genuinely thought he was writing a good book. To come to mind, The Uglies by Scott Westerfield. It's a YA series set in a world where beauty is valued above all. It was so horribly written, and the characters were not interesting at all. I can usually fly through YA novels, even if they're not particularly good, but I had to stop reading this one after 40 pages or so. Lightboxes by Shane Jones. Here's my Goodreads review. This is one of the most confusing and unengaging books I have ever read. It took me 2 weeks to read 150 pages. I was more confused with each page. The author tries to be innovative and edgy with the format, but it adds absolutely nothing of value to the story. The characters are not reliable at all, which only adds to the confusion. I also feel as if I've been bludgeoned to death with metaphor. I almost abandoned the book, but didn't because I needed answers and a resolution. Spoiler alert, I received neither. I don't know about worst book, but the only one I could never finish. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I enjoy reading, especially self/motivational topics, but this one is so damn hard to follow. Then I got the audio tape to force myself to listen while sitting in traffic. I just can't do it. This Is Where I Leave You. To me it's a book about a pompous piece of crap blaming everyone else for his crappy personality. There are a couple moments where he has a point, but it's not worth the massive amounts of undeserved self-pity and constant disgusting thoughts about every woman he sees. And I mean everyone. He talks about his own mother's breasts like 4 times. The Pearl, John Steinbeck. I'm a huge fan of some of Steinbeck's other works, especially Cannery Row. The Pearl, on the other hand, was an atrocious read, depressing the whole way through, reinforcing the same message throughout the book that was introduced within the first 20 pages. Any of the Maximum Ride books after the third are a sin. A book called The Last Tribe. It starts off as your stereotypical post-apocalyptic jaunt, with an extended family working to come together in the face of a supervirus that decimates the world. However, while I was reading it, I noticed several very stupid factoids. 1. Apparently, the disease kills 100% of the people that catch it, with an immunity rate of about 1 person per million infected. Yep, about 1 survivor for every million people. Firstly, diseases, even the most virulent, don't work that way. Secondly, if the disease killed that many people on such a wide scale, the human race is effectively extinct anyway, since the survivors would be so spread out and isolated they wouldn't be able to find each other, much less reproduce. Most of the people in the book are already related, so they don't even have fresh genes to work with. 2. The standard super genius teenage girl that is clumsy but everyone likes her. There is this 39-year-old survivor that is so goddamn obnoxious about how super smart she is. I just can't. And, of freaking course she is described as beautiful and friendly, and, I rolled my eyes whenever she opened her mouth. 3. The survivors decide to migrate to a new region. Fine. They meet up first in Vermont, and Vermont can get cold as frick in the winter. So I can see where they might want to move to a warmer locale, so they can practice agriculture easier. Where do they decide to move? All on the advice of the 13-year-old mentioned above. Motherfricking Hawaii. They, of goddamn course, find an old retired pilot surviving in New York City. So all they have to do is find and fuel a plane. They have no issues with the above, nor in actually flying to Hawaii. Everything is peachy frickin' keen. I can see not wanting to live in Vermont, since it gets cold as frick. But, the way they describe it, apparently everywhere it isn't 70 degrees plus year round is impossible to live in. Like, you dumb motherfrickers. You do realize that the Native Americans lived in New England for thousands of years. farming crops with Stone Age technology, right? It isn't impossible. Far from it. And even if they didn't want to live in New England, one of the families in the survivor group comes from Raleigh, North Carolina. They could move back down there, where it is warmer with a longer growing season. Plus, even if they didn't have vehicles, they did. You can walk down there if you have to. Plus, if something goes wrong in Raleigh, you can leave if you have to. In Hawaii, once you get there, you are stuck there. Not to mention tropical diseases and lack of resources. But, nope. They go to fricking Hawaii. So it just seems to me that the author wrote about what they thought would be cool, not what would be realistic. Only 1 in a million people surviving already essentially dooms humanity to death within a generation. But the survivors proceed to isolate themselves on an island in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. Frick. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I finished all 4.4 million words of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. I know this is sad, but I feel a sense of accomplishment. Books 7, 10 were probably the most mind-numbing boring crap I've ever read. But after you've made it that far, you can't stop. I think the series was originally supposed to be 10 books, but it ended up being 14. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. The Book of Mormon. I didn't just read, I believed it. I'll let the damned book guide my life. Aka ruin my life. Ugh, I can't believe I fell for such obvious foolishness. The Old Man and the Sea. A 127-page story about a guy's fishing trip. Not sure if it's been mentioned yet, but Atlas Shrugged. I only got halfway through it before I gave up. But damn, I was tempted to self-immolate myself because of that garbage. Matched. The Quran. Unfortunately, I bought into the whole Islam is a peaceful religion until I actually read the text for myself. Lots of disemboweling. The Art of the Deal. The Awakening. I had to read the synaplet and I hated every page, just because of how selfish Edna was. I never enjoyed her character and I ended up spark noting all of the assignments a third of the way into the book. I can't remember the name, but there was this one book centered around the premise of the harsh winter of 2009 never ending. The main character speaks in this weird way, where he's clearly missing some words in sentences and it's generally hard to read when you barely grasp what the main character is even saying. Great Expectations by Charles Penans. The book can be summarized in one episode of South Park, yet it rambles for 400 pages. Pretty much any Hemingway. The Great Gatsby. Forced to read it in high school, and hated every damn page of it. On the other hand, I also had to read Watership Down and that's still one of my favorites today. A Separate Piece. And The Ass Saw the Angel by Nick Cave. Not because it was bad, but because it was so dark, and twisted and just freaking horrifying. Made Lalita seem so tame in a lot of ways. 10/10ths recommend. The Mists of Avalon. I can't deal with that amount of women power expressed by sighing melodramatically to the moon and awkward sex scenes. Maybe an unpopular one, but The Hunger Games. My lord. The first 2 books were pretty good. The third book though, lol your sister is dead and the rebellion is also kind of evil. The end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can watch together.